That's 40 centimeters.
Wow, that's and you're in Missouri?
Michigan, northern
Oh,
Michigan.
in Michigan. Wow. Psh.
Actually, from where I am, I drive south to get to Canada.
Really? Oh, you're that high up.
So,
Yeah, I mean it's fun for me. I like the snow with the kids and stuff for a day or two, and after that, it's already okay. I had enough of the chains and the all the sweaters and all this stuff. We're just waiting here for some more people to get on. That's why today's been a bit longer for. There's been a few people that have had a problem getting to today's lecture, and we're trying to figure out if they're going to be getting on here soon because this is a very, very important lecture. Like I've said before, it's probably the strongest evidence, I believe, from all the evidence. And we'd want there to be a full class today. So we're trying to decide whether we're going to move forward, if people are getting on, if we're going to move forward, or we're going to push this off a week. I know you guys are already here, so I mean, I don't want you guys to also miss, but we don't want a bunch of people that said they couldn't make it, or some are trying to. I guess we'll find out here in a few minutes. Um, where is everybody else here? We have Chaim, are you there? Trevor?
Yes, I'm here. Yes.
Yes, so we've got and Trevor's there. Okay, I see. So yeah, how do you guys feel about if we were to continue this lecture to next week? Would you guys object to that? I know you guys are here and your time is valuable, but I also am concerned that the probably one of the most important lectures out of the series, we only have three people here today. So what do you guys think? How do you feel about that, Leo?
As
uh,
long as I'm eventually, so it's okay with me.
yeah, exactly what Trevor just said. I agree.
Okay. Rabbi Moshe, are you there? Can you hear us? I don't know if he's listening in there.
I've already learned something from this course, and that is how to spell Chaim in Hebrew.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
there you go, Chaim. Okay, we've got six in here now. Let's let's give them a few more minutes then and see if we can get a couple more people. Then we'll just move forward since we're here. Elisheva's just joining us. We were just discussing of whether we're gonna be pushing off today's lecture or not because it's a really important one, and there's been a few people that weren't able to get or they're trying to see if they can get on. We don't want them to miss it, so we'll decide here in a few minutes. While we're waiting, anybody have any updates, questions, comments? Anything from the previous lectures? I know I haven't gotten to respond to some of your emails. I've responded to some of them, but there's a lot, and I'm working through it as fast as I can. Some of them are really good. Trevor, anything new to update or any questions anybody has about anything, any topic
I
of it
have
all?
a, I have a question that's to follow on to my question last week about you explained that the meaning of goy means nation. So if I'm one of the goyim, that means I'm one of the nations. And to me, that has a sinister connotation that would make sense given the history of Israel. And I'm wondering if that means that I am one of am I basically Amalek? Of the nations would be
No,
hostile.
no. No. Amalek is a very specific. Amalek, if you read it in the Torah, you have it's actually in the genealogy of Esau. You see that Amalek was a person. He was the grandson of Esav of Esau. Yeah, because he's the son of I believe Eliphaz. So there's Esau bore Eliphaz. Eliphaz, one of his children is Amalek. So Amalek is a very very specific nation that rose out of this person that was the grandson of Esau. And you also see them in, for example, in when the Jews left Egypt, you have the first nation that came and challenged Israel after all the things that happened in Egypt, right? All the miracles and the splitting of the Red Sea. As soon as that ended, Vayavo Amalek vayelachem b'Yisrael b'Refidim, and Amalek came and to fight and to attack Israel in a place called Refidim. So Amalek is this representative. It's also spiritually like in the book of the Zohar, where it's talking about how Amalek is really a spiritual power that embodies the main power fighting against godliness in the world that attributes everything to randomness. So this is a very specific lineage, and we don't know who today who specifically Amalek is. The people that whose ideology fit them the best were the Germans, the Nazis who, if you read some of Mein Kampf and read like the way that they thought about the world and the Aryan race and all these things, they really embody the philosophy of Amalek. But Amalek is one of many nations, and it's a very specific lineage that we don't really know exactly who it is today. But in the Torah, there are 70 main nations. Now, of course, we have a lot more today in the world, right? There's lots of different nations and places, but in their spiritual base, in their spiritual sholish, in their root, they all come from 70. And so the nations are people are from can be from any one of those 70 nations. So just because the connotation of goy or nation, that absolutely does not mean necessarily that you are from Amalek. Rather, anybody who's here and dealing with any kind of spirituality and wanting to know about Judaism or even any religion for that matter, the likelihood of him being Amalek already is pretty low because Amalek is a very, very anti any type of spirituality in their essence. So no, I highly doubt that you are Amalek, Leo. All right, does that answer your question?
Oh, yeah, perfect. Thank you. Every time there's a answer that leads to more questions, and that is reality.
Yeah, we're always learning. I'm always learning every day. Even for my kids, I learn sometimes the most. Okay, I think we've actually got a lot of people that have been able to make it now. We're up higher. Hi everybody. If you guys can turn on your cameras, it helps a lot more so I can see you guys, so we can interact a bit. I mean, I know sometimes it's not possible to turn the camera on, but whoever can. We were debating whether to move forward today because there's a lot of people that are running late and couldn't make it, and today's a very important lecture. So we were going to wait to give you people an opportunity. It looks like most are on.
אני חושב שאפשר להתחיל.
Okay. So
אוקיי.
Bezat Hashem, yeah, so we're gonna start. Okay. So everybody, thank you again. Great to see all of you. Before we get started, does anybody have any technical questions, any questions about previous lectures before we start today's lecture, where we are on the fifth lecture? We're in Divine Indications Part 2 in the Prophecy. This is a very, very important lecture today. Some of the strongest evidence, in my opinion, will be in today's lecture. So pretty soon we'll get going with that. I just wanted to give anybody an opportunity. I think actually there was in the chat a question of what I'm seeing now. Let me see here. Yes, Trevor. Atheism is more. Oh, that's not good. Do we have an issue here with that?
That's okay. We're gonna resume the recording once you start the lecture of today de facto.
Okay, sounds good. So, Trevor, yes, atheism is more akin to Amalek ideology, but that doesn't necessarily mean anybody who's an atheist is Amalek, but that is more their ideology. That is correct. Okay. Yes, and Trevor's made the statement, this is also chapter 5 of the book. Chapter 5 of the book. The lectures have so far corresponded to the chapters. I'm trying to kind of give that feel. So anybody who wants to follow along with things in the book, you can do that as well. So I think we're going to get started. Moshe Pelitz, we can start the recording. Okay, everybody. So we are here today, lecture number 5, Divine Indications Part 2, Prophecy. This is where we're at. As you see here, everybody can hear me good. You guys can see also the PowerPoint here on the side. We are in lecture 5, as you see here. I think next week we're going to split up Divine Indications Part 3 into 2 separate lectures because it's long and I don't want to overwhelm with information. We'll make it up in one of the other lectures, so we're still going to have 12, but I think lecture 6 will have 2 parts to it. And today I want to really move on and get directly into the divine indications of prophecy. Now, when we're using prophecy as rational evidence for divine origin, we really have to set some parameters first, because the idea of prophecy Many rational people have a very big misconception about what prophecy actually is. And this misconception comes from the entertainment industry. Right now we're heading into the last month of the year in the regular solar calendar. We're in December, and this is the time frame of the year where we're going to have all sorts of astrologers and fortune tellers, and we're going to have all these on news programs and all sorts of streaming shows, people that are making predictions, right? And most of us don't take these things seriously, right? Similar to like people reading horoscopes. Most people don't read too much into these things. But most of these statements that are given are usually things like, next year there will be war, there will be some great natural disaster. Now, sometimes they're right, sometimes they're not. But even if they are right, let's say one of these prediction people gets up and says, there's going to be a big war in the Middle East this year. Does that mean that this person's a prophet? Unfortunately, it's been more often than not that there are wars in the Middle East, right? So predicting that it's going to be hot in Southern California in the summer, it's not really, it doesn't really make you a prophet. But it's these types of misconceptions about the idea of prophecy that we really need to deal with, and that what we need to discuss and debunk before we get into what prophecy actually is, because prophecy in the Torah is one of the most, if not the most, direct way that Hashem communicates his will with his people through the prophet of Moses, through the later prophets. And there were very specific conditions to how we know who is and isn't a prophet, who we should listen to and who we shouldn't. We're not going to be looking at it as much from that perspective today, right? Because today we don't have prophecy where someone can come and tell us I'm a prophet, this is what you need to do. That's really was more in the time of the last prophets that lived up to the destruction of the first temple. But what we are doing now is we're going to be looking at these prophecies and using them as evidence within our cumulative rational test that we've been doing for, of course, all of you that have been following along with the lectures in the book. I think you guys have really, a lot of your emails and your answers were showing me that you guys are really understanding and really engaging, and I'm happy with that. So let us examine what is the criteria for an authentic prophecy, right? So something that we can all agree rationally that if somebody makes this prediction under these conditions, we're going to say, hey, there's no way he could have known this. This has to have come from a metaphysical power. So the first thing, the obvious, but we need to state the obvious. One second, I got somebody here in the waiting room. Let me let them in. Okay, great. And actually, wait, this is a good place to, we have a question down here. Trevor's also asking if prophecy is one of the 13 principles of faith in Judaism. One of Maimonides' 13 principles of faith is yes, that Moses is the greatest of all prophets, and there will never be a prophet again like Moses. So yes, prophecy is included there in more than one of the principles of faith. So let's get into what are the conditions for prophecy. So the first thing we said, chronological priority. And that means that the prophecy must be documented before the event occurs, right? Saying something after the fact, I mean, we really don't have to explain much more about that. Now, for the purpose of our lecture, and in order not to get into an argument about when the written Torah, when the 5 books of Moses was written, because as we discussed in our earlier lectures, there is a discrepancy between what secular historians say, what the Jewish tradition says. So I don't really want to get into that argument, even though I'm confident I could win that argument. But without getting into that argument, we're going to deal with events that occurred in the last 2,000 years. Because events that occurred in the last 2,000 years, for sure, the written Torah existed. How do I know for a fact? Does anybody want to answer this question? Because we dealt with it in the previous one of the previous lectures. How do I know for a fact that from all sources, the Torah existed at the minimum 2,000 years ago? Anybody want to take a stab at the question? All right. So the reason is because 2,300 years ago, approximately, the Torah was translated into Greek, right? And it was already in the possessions and widely disseminated. So if it's translated that means it had to have existed, right? So nobody in their right mind is going to tell us that the written Torah didn't exist at minimum 2,000 years ago. So I'm dealing with things that occurred only in the last 2,000 years, and that's how we can skip a few lectures and focus really just on this evidence. The second is specific and irrational. The prediction must be specific and unforeseeable through logic or historical patterns, and it cannot be inferred from precedent or probability, right? So, for example, if somebody would come and say, America is going to be destroyed, and doesn't give us, it says within the next 5 years or 10 years or 15 years, America will be destroyed. Now, it sounds at first glance, someone might say, hey, wait, that's pretty specific. And if it, God forbid, happened, like maybe this person knew something. How did they know? But the truth is that if we look through history, it's almost a given that every type of large, powerful empire at some point in time in history has met its destruction, right? From going back to the Babylonian Empire, to the Assyrian Empire, to the Greeks, to the Romans, right? There's been many, many empires that have been extremely powerful, and many of them have met their demise, even with the fall of the Soviet Union not so long ago. So saying something, you can actually indicate things or predict things from previous historical models. So when I say something that's logical or something that I can infer from things that have happened in the past, that's not necessarily a prophecy. So we are looking for predictions in the Torah that preceded in the last 2,000 years that are specific, but also irrational. Rather, you have to say something that is not likely to happen, that most people, when you said it, are going to say, you're crazy. How's that ever going to happen, right? So that's the second thing. Our third in our cumulative test, you see, lawyers, we really like cumulative tests. I think it's something about law school. We're always doing these tests, and every branch of law has them. So it's part of that has kind of leaked over into my lecturing and into my book also. But the idea of building something logically and cumulative. So we have the first two, we said the chronology, specific and irrational. And now the third condition is supernatural control. The prophecy must demonstrate control over nature, history, or human actions, outcomes beyond human manipulation, right? Something that, now if we want to make it even more for this prediction to be more of a wow factor, the more you can show control over history and nature by saying something that's going to happen, that's irrational, that's improbable, that makes it all that much more impressive. And then the biggest snare for fake predictions is the fourth item, which is a clear translation. Meaning the meaning of this text that we are deciphering, it has to be indisputable and clearly understood without decoding, without interpretation. And this is, for example, I want us to look at one of Nostradamus, the so-called prophet. I want us to look at one of his predictions, and I'll explain why, according to this cumulative test, you can't consider him a prophet simply from the fact that the things that he wrote were so cryptic and open to interpretation. And we're going to look at two scholars on the same prophecy and what conclusions they came to. So I don't want to spend too much time on Nostradamus, but anybody who doesn't know who Nostradamus is, you can Google him. And he's somebody that wrote what's quatrains. He wrote these very cryptic type poems that made all types of predictions. There's people saying that it's prophecy, some saying he didn't intend for them to be prophecies. But bottom line, let's look at the content and see if this is something that you can really prove as a prophecy. So here's one of Nostradamus' prophecies. In fire, the color of gold from the sky seen on earth, struck by the high-born one, a marvelous happening, great slaughter of humanity, a nephew taken from the great one, the deaths of the spectators, the proud one escapes. Okay, so I think you guys already kind of see we have a problem here, because this could mean a very, very many different things. And just to illustrate that point, Erica Cheatham in her book, she says that this prophecy is referring to Napoleon III in 1870. Henry Roberts, who is a different Nostradamus scholar, he says, "Oh, this is clear. This is actually, I mean, his language is actually, it's a bit humorous to me. He says, oh yeah, this is absolutely clear. This is referring to Einstein and nuclear fission and nuclear fission that the E equals mc squared formula. How could you not see that?" Right? So you see that in this situation, when something is cryptic and it needs to be interpreted, and fire means this and the sky means that, and the slaughter of humanity, it's a spiritual slaughter, not a physical one. Whenever you start getting into commentary and interpretation, we can make a prophecy pretty much out of anything. So again, we have the four things that we talked about. So it's got to be clear. It needs to be written before. It can't be predicted through something that's a historical model or logical. And the more control over nature, the more impressive the prediction becomes. So that's really, does anybody have any questions about, this, the cumulative test, or what we're looking for? Does everybody agree that if a prediction meets these four criterias that we talked about, right? Like these four, if somebody comes in advance and gives us something that fits this criteria, would you all agree that this is something that cannot be figured out by somebody without some kind of metaphysical power or connection? You guys can just raise your hand or take a thumbs up. All right, if nobody is like chiming in and arguing with me, then I'll assume you guys are accepting it. But we have some thumbs up. Okay. Good. So yeah, I mean, I think we've set some pretty high standards for what a prophecy is. Now let's take a look at some of them. Most of them are going to focus on the exile, but I want to give us a warm-up prediction. This is one that I call a warm-up because it's not from the Torah. And this one is also one that I believe is a weaker part of the evidence because it doesn't come from the Torah and it comes from midrashic literature, which it's very impressive, this prediction, but I want to focus on prophecies from the written Torah, from the 5 books of Moses. But this is kind of a warm-up, so you guys can see how this fits into the cumulative test. So in Midrashic literature, which was canonized about 1500, I always take the latest date. So 1500 years ago at the latest, because that's when the Talmud was canonized, but it was written quite some time before that. But within Midrashic literature, which is part of the oral law and stories that go with the oral law, this is actually on a midrash of Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs by Solomon, and Midrash Eicha, which is also by Solomon. And in two places, it's stated plainly and specifically, as opposed to what we just saw with Nostradamus, is that the Western Wall, also known as the Wailing Wall, shall never be destroyed. And it says, "But behold, he was standing behind our wall." That's a phrase from the Song of Songs, from Shir Shirim. Now the Midrash interprets this. What does that mean, standing behind our wall? Behind the western wall of the Bet HaMikdash, the Jewish Holy Temple, regarding which the Holy One, blessed is he, swore to him that it shall never be destroyed. More specifically, even in the Midrash of Lamentations, it says, "And it was decreed from heaven that the western wall shall never be destroyed." Why? For the presence is in the west. There is also a tradition that the reason the Western Wall can never be destroyed is because King David actually is the one who built the foundations of the Western Wall. If we go back to the book of Samuel, you can read a part there where King David wants to build the temple. He wakes up in the middle of the night and says, "I'm in Jerusalem and I'm sleeping in a castle, and Hashem is still in a tent," right? Because they had the tent of meeting still back then. They had the tent in Shiloh. And then they moved it to another place after it was destroyed by the Philistines. So he woke up and he couldn't sleep, and he said, "How can I be in my bed in my castle and Hashem is in a tent?" And he got up in the middle of the night and he said, "We're getting to work. We're going to start building this temple right now." That was King David. And the prophet Nathan initially encouraged him, but then a prophecy came to Nathan in the night, and it said, the Hashem said to Nathan, "Go stop David and tell him that his hands are too bloody to build my house of peace. The temple is a place of peace for all the nations. And even though you, David, you have done," oh, one second, hold on. We got more people coming in today. I'm actually really glad that there's a big turnout in the end today because it's a very important lecture. One moment. welcome to all the latecomers. I'm glad you guys are joining us. Anything you missed from the beginning, it's actually very important, whoever just joined us, that when the recording goes up on the website of the Academy, that you guys watch the beginning, because it's very important that we set up what the criterias for prophecy are, and you guys missed some of that. So, I mean, you'll still catch the lecture, you'll understand what's going on, but important to go back and watch. So, back to King David, we said that the prophet Nathan, Hashem told him, go tell David, you will not build this temple, but your son, Solomon, Shlomo. Shlomo in Hebrew literally means complete, which is what embodies peace. Your son Solomon will build this temple. But the the Midrash states that before Nathan could stop him, he had already started on the foundation, and this was the Western Wall. And that was one of the reasons that if the King David built it, it was built from such a high spiritual level, it can never be destroyed. So let's look at our criterias now. Let's look at the what we discussed and see, first of all, historically, there's no real, I mean, there's some people that try to get cute and say it's the inner wall, not the outer wall, but I'll remind you all that this was written after the first temple was destroyed, right? We're not dealing here with a Torah prophecy. Soon we're going to get into Torah prophecies. We're dealing with a midrash that was actually written after the destruction of the first temple. So when they wrote it, they knew already that the temple and the inner walls had been destroyed. So they wouldn't write a prophecy or a prediction saying something would never be destroyed that was already destroyed, right? So it's obvious that they're referring to the surviving relic. Now, Israel is a land bridge between Asia, Europe, right, the Middle East, Africa. Anybody who wanted to wage war in medieval times through these continents would walk along right through the country. There's been empires here, from the Byzantine empires to Ottoman empires to Arabs, Turks, Mongols, whoever you can imagine has been here in Israel during the last 2,000 years. And Jerusalem has been destroyed and rebuilt at least 5 times. However, this specific relic is still there, and it's always been there. And at no point in time, and I mean, you think about it, there's many unfriendly people to the Jewish tradition that were here in these times. And for some reason, this wall is still there. Anyone who can come to Israel and visit it, it's a very, very, very beautiful place to visit, a very spiritual place. Highly recommend that you guys come and see it, whoever can. But this was stated in advance. Now, why would somebody risk saying something like this? I mean, imagine today the fallout, because Jews are very aware of this midrash. It's taught widely. Children know this. Imagine today some terrorist goes and just blows all this up. You've already got, you're going to have a very serious situation based on the fact that there's a specific oral law source that says that this is never going to be destroyed, right? So there's an element of risk, something that doesn't make sense that you can come and say about this wall will never be destroyed when you've seen that the rest of the temple has been destroyed, which means it's certainly possible. Now, again, this because it comes from a midrash, and there is some type of place where someone who's very skeptical can argue for an interpretation, right? Let's say, God forbid, this wall actually was destroyed. You could still say, well, this was meant in a spiritual way. We're talking about the spiritual wall, right? People aren't going to take off their kippas necessarily if the wall or the top part of the wall, maybe the bottom is still there. That's why I call this a warm-up, because what I'm going to show you guys now is something that is much, much, much more detailed, strong, and specific. Sometimes I argue against myself. As you see, like someone who's trying to convince somebody, I can just say, you know what, this is the strongest, because this sounds very convincing to people. But I really like to bring it from my ways. What I always think, if somebody was trying to convince me that this is proof that the Torah is real, what would I say? And that's kind of how my book is also. I like to bring the things that are, what are the possible counter arguments? Because I'm not afraid of counter arguments, because I know I'm holding the truth in my hand. I'm not worried about questions. I'm not worried about counter arguments, because I've seen enough of the evidence to know where there is no counter arguments. So this Western Wall prophecy is a strong one, and it meets our criterias, but there is a little space here where somebody could potentially say it's open to interpretation. But now I want to get into the Torah prophecies, which I don't believe the case is so with this specific chain of prophecies. Exile, dispersion, and return to the land, the most comprehensive prophetic sequence in the Torah. So let's get started. Does anybody have any questions? Oh, wait, I see I missed some here before we get started here. Sounds like. So Trevor's asking if the character of the prophet is important as well. The prophet should be learned and educated person of both religion, sciences, but also character traits. Not just any random uneducated peasant can become a prophet all of a sudden. So yes, that's absolutely true. But in Jewish law right now, as far as what the halacha is that prophecy ceased with the destruction of the first temple. Even the people, even people. Sorry, I'm sorry, not with the first temple, with the second temple. There is no longer any type of prophecy. There were still prophets alive, like Ezra, Nehemiah, in the time of the second temple, after the first Babylonian exile. But since that destruction, there are no more prophets. The last prophet will be the Messiah that comes back, because right now there is nobody that can come, even the greatest rabbi of the generation, the smartest sage, anybody alive, no matter what his character is and how learned he is. It's that time of the world where a human being has the ability to see at the level of these prophets is no longer possible due to what's happened in the world and due to the fact that there is no more temple and due to what's called Yeridat Dorot. So there is another level called Ruach HaKodesh, which is a divine spirit that rests on people, that they can see things, and that it does exist still in our generation. There are certain rabbis of a very high spiritual caliber that know things, that have a very, very in tune spiritual antenna. We had people even 500 years ago, the Arizal, many, many stages that have had Ruach HaKodesh, which is this divine inspiration, but it is nowhere near the level of prophecy. Prophecy is something that we can really not imagine. I mean, if you just go back and read, for example, in the book of Ezekiel, Yechezkel HaNavi, the things that Ezekiel saw, the things that he saw in heaven, in the Shemaim. I mean, anybody that you would read this to today would say, "Hey, this guy is on, I don't know what pills he took, right? What could he? How does a person see these things?" These people saw and understood God in a way that we cannot grasp, and this direct communication no longer exists. The Melech HaMashiach, the King Messiah, when the Messiah comes, he will be a prophet. But at this point, there is no more prophecy. And all of the prophets that we have right now, the written prophets, are things that were needed for generations. So, for example, after we have the 5 books of Moses, all the prophets there's in Tanakh. Why is it called Tanakh? Tanakh stands for Torah, which is the 5 books of Moses, Nevi'im, which is prophet, and Ktuvim. Ktuvim are the written prophecies. Now, what's the difference between Ktuvim and Nevi'im? They're both prophets. They're both from essentially the same time periods. Why are they split up into these two categories? For example, the book of Daniel was a prophet, but the book of Daniel is not considered part of the prophets. It's considered part of the Ktuvim, part of the writings. Why is that? Because there are certain things that were said to prophets in the time, like, for example, Jeremiah and Ezekiel, where Hashem said to them, Jeremiah, you go tell the Jews this message. You go tell them that if they don't change their ways, the first temple is going to be destroyed and this is what's going to happen. So anything that Hashem told a prophet to go and orally relay, that is what appears in the book of prophets. And there were other prophets also, but the ones that were needed for all of generations were the ones that were then written down. Now, the writings is different in the sense, what's the difference? Again, we said between the prophets and the writings. The writings are things that Hashem didn't tell the prophet to go tell Israel. He told them, there are things I'm going to tell you now that if you told Israel, they would not understand what you're talking about. Like the book of Daniel. Daniel has this dream, right? And he has all the animals that he sees and so everything that's in the book of Daniel, if Hashem would have told him, go tell the Jewish people this dream you saw, they would say, okay, what am I supposed to do with this? What does this mean? Nobody would understand it. So there were many things in the writings that Hashem said, hey, this is going to be necessary for generations. So write it down. At some point, they will understand later what it is that we need to learn from this. But it wasn't directed. These are prophecies that weren't necessarily directed to the people of those generations. And that's how you can clearly see throughout the Tanakh that there's a big difference between the prophecies that were meant to be communicated directly to Israel at the time, and then it's also relevant for all of generations, or things that Hashem told the prophet to write, and we're going to need this later. So, for example, you have the very last prophet, and it says, "Hereni sholach lechem et Eliya Navi lifnei yom agadol v'anora." I'm sending to you the prophet Elijah before Hashem's big day of judgment, and he will return, ve'yeshiv lev avot al banim, he will return the hearts of fathers to their sons, the hearts of fathers to their sons, and sons to their fathers. And he ends, the last prophet, the last line in the prophecies is Skor et Torat Moshe Avdi. Remember the Torah of Moses, my servant, which I commanded before the great day of judgment. That's the very last prophecy. Since then, there's never been another prophet. So that's how the prophecies end. So that was a very long answer to Trevor's question, but actually that's an important distinction that we should make. So when you're reading Tanakh, you understand the difference between prophecies that were communicated orally to the people and then written because they were needed, and things that were cryptic, that were written for all of generations, but not necessarily orally communicated. And the best example is the book of Daniel. So moving on along now. You're welcome, Trevor. Trevor's happy with the answer. Okay. Let's move along. Sorry?
Do you have time for a follow-up question?
Sure. Go ahead. Let's try to keep it brief though, because I really want to. I want to get. Go ahead. I'll answer. I'm the one that usually makes the answer longer. So go ahead, ask your question. I'll make sure I answer it quicker. Go ahead.
It's quick. Jeremy England, who lives in Israel now, has written a book, a series of articles about the Torah, and in it he says that it's a no-brainer that Jews should build a temple now on the Temple Mount, which sounds good to me. If that is done, could there be prophets again?
Well, no, unfortunately, we can't just go and build a temple on our own. That's actually pretty clear in Halacha that the building of this third temple will need to be done by the Messiah. So even if we just physically build a structure, that's not what's going to do it. The third temple comes with a redemption. We can come back to Israel. It's actually a very big mitzvah to come live in Israel. Very big part of this whole process of the end times and the Messiah is for the Jews to return to Israel. But the building, if we look in Maimonides and the rules, the actual building, like we saw, even King David couldn't build it. So if King David can't build it, we're definitely not going to be the ones building it. It needs to be divinely ordained and needs to come from a very, very high place. And the Messiah, when he comes, we'll know. How is it going to be exactly? We're not sure. But yeah, just us building a building is definitely not going to return prophecy. This needs to come from above, this directive. Okay, so let's get into the Torah, the most comprehensive prophetic sequence in the Torah. So I want to focus on the logical progression of chapter 28 in Deuteronomy, Dvarim Kafchet. This sequence of prophecy comes from what we call the Tochecha. Tochecha is the admonition. It is a very, very terrifying part of the Torah where when we read this every year in the Torah halls, people, we try to read it quietly and quickly. And it's very, very unpleasant, but it's something that needs to be read every year. And it comes right after the blessings. If you follow the Torah, this will be all the blessings that you will be provided. And then we get into what's going to happen if you don't follow the Torah. And there's two different admonitions in the 5 books of Moses. And unfortunately, anybody who's learned a bit about Jewish history, every single thing in this admonition at some point in time has happened to the Jewish people because the Jewish people were not faithful to the law of Moses, and that was the result over many different times, including the destructions of the temple. So we're not going to get into reading the whole admonition, but I'm going to focus on the exile prophecies and what's going to happen to the Jews in this exile. And again, I'm not copying and pasting here from all sorts of places because this is another thing. The Torah is a really big document, right? The